It's only me, home from the sea, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. I'm all dressed up like a Christmas tree, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. I'll sail the seas until I croak. I'll fight and swear and chew and smoke. But I can't swim a single stroke, said Barnacle Bill the sailor.
Are you young and handsome, sir? Are you young and handsome, sir? Are you young and handsome, sir? That's a sailor lady.
Old and rough and mean and tough, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. I never can get rough enough, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Why, I can whip a dozen men, and my age is 110, and now I'm starting all over again, said Barnacle Bill the sailor.
I'll come down and let you in. I'll come down and let you in. I'll come down and let you in, said the fair old lady.
Well, hurry before I bust in the door, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. I'll rear and tear and rant and roar, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. I'll spin your yarns and tell you lies. I'll drink your coffee and eat your pies. I'll kiss your cheeks and black your eyes, said Barnacle Bill the sailor.
Sing me a love song sweet and low. Sing me a love song sweet and low. Sing me a love song sweet and low, said the fair old lady.
Oh, 60 men on a dead man's chest, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Yee-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Oh, high rig a jig and a jaunting car. Oh-ho, are you most done? Hurry, my boys, let the bullgine run, said Barnacle Bill the sailor.
Tell me, sir, when we'll wed. Tell me, sir, when we'll wed. Tell me, sir, when we'll wed, said the fair old maiden.
I've got me a gal in every port, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. The handsome girls is what I court, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. With my false heart and flattering tongue, I courts them all, both old and young. I courts them all and marries none, said Barnacle Bill the sailor.
When will we meet again? When will we meet again? When will we meet again? Said the sad old lady.
Never again, I'll come no more, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Tonight I'm sailing from the shore, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. If you sit and wait for me to come, setting and waiting and sucking your thumb, you'll wait till the day of your doom, said Barnacle Bill the sailor. Goodbye. Once upon a time in New York, there was a young fellow going to that voice school down there. Janna, what's the name of that famous voice school in New York? Remember?
What voice school? Are you talking about Juilliard?
I don't know what it is. Anyway, this fellow studied voice very hard. He was very good, and he graduated. And an opera company came along and hired him, and very soon he was touring with that opera company, touring through the world as opera companies do. They went to Western Europe and landed in Italy and came to Milan. You know, Milan is the acme, the pinnacle of opera and music. There, even the banker in his big, splendid office knows all the songs, all the acts, the sequences. The housewife knows all the arias. She sings them in the kitchen. Even the little boy in the gutter, the little shoeshine boy, knows all the words, all the nuances, all the arias of all the operas. Well, this chap's day came. He launched into the second act at La Scala. You remember the great opera house there? And his turn came. He got into his song, went through to the end. It was greeted with tumultuous applause, so much so that he gave an encore, and he went through it again. This time, he was greeted with tremendous plaudits, much applause. This went on, 2, 3, 4 more times. Eventually, this young man, all aglow with enthusiasm, came down to the footlights and said, this is what reminds me of it. He said, "Thank you so much for your warm applause. It fills my heart with gratitude. But really, you know, we can't take any more time from the opera. The opera must go on. The show must go on." At this point, way up in the second balcony, a small, shrill voice piped up and said, "Nothing a doing. You gotta do it till you get it to right."
I was born in North Scituate, quite a long time ago now, and I knew a number of people there quite well. One fellow that I liked was a man named Frank Cook. He's the fellow that sat in that little caboose right next to the railroad track at the grade crossing near the railroad station. And I used to visit with him. He knew a lot about trains. he had a chance to see them all, and he remembered them all. He knew every train there was and what they sounded like, and I learned about trains from him. So he said one day when he was showing me how if you have a passenger train and it starts up from the station, it sounds this way, and when you get north of Braintree, where there are 2 tracks instead of 1, then the trains can pass each other. And if an express train comes by, it sounds one way, and if a freight train comes by, it sounds another way. And this is what they sounded like. I sat with Frank one whole afternoon one day in that little hot booth. And no trains came at that time. When the trains come, of course, he takes his standard out that has the stop sign on it. He stops all the wagons and all the people from crossing the tracks there when the people are coming. But this was a dull afternoon, and I began to get bored, and I said, Frank, how can you stand it? And Frank said, what do you mean, how can I stand it? And I said, well, Frank, you gotta be here. And Frank said, well, you gotta be somewhere, you might as well be here. One Friday morning, I was going out to help Mr. Stoddard get his hay in, and it was still quite early, and the commuter train to Boston from Greenbush hadn't gone by yet. And there was Frank, not in his little booth, but he was out on the platform waiting for the train. And I stopped by and I said, Frank, what are you doing here this morning instead of being in the booth? And he said, well, it's Friday, he said, and I'm going into town to get drunk. And he says, gosh, how I dread it. Well, it seems to me that we ought to be able to do something about this. You know, with electricity coming in, this being 1911, almost 1912 now, maybe they can rig some kind of electric signal at the crossing, and they won't have to have Frank sitting there all day long. Of course, he'll be out of a job, if that's what you call it. But that might help. And on his other problem, once a month or so, maybe there's something we could do about that, too. Well, there's another fellow that I knew, and his name was Libo Litchfield. I don't know whether you can remember him or not. He's kind of old now, I guess. He had a salt room humor that struck in, and he hasn't been well ever since. But he raised all Ned in the school, and he grew so big that this Miss Simpkins couldn't quite handle him anymore, and he sort of went through the school until he got too big for it, and they let him go. He didn't really graduate. But he was a child of nature. He knew about ducks, and he knew about owls and things like that, and I spent some time with him, and he told me about them. You know, he'd imitate a pair of ducks taking off. You know how they do in the spring when they begin to pair up, and there's 2 of them that go, and they sound something like, fly away. And he told me about owls, and so I went out calling owls myself. And the most wonderful example of owls, I think, are the barred owls. Now, they're called barred owls because the pattern of the feathers across the chest makes a barring pattern, you see. And they stand nearly 2 feet high if you include the tail, and you really have to because it belongs to them. And they're beneficial, of course. They eat mice and things like some of these other hawks and owls. But they're real characters. So I went out one night, and I took a few friends with me. It's just as entertaining out calling owls as it is at, well, one of those church things where people come and then they do things, you know. And so it's quite entertaining sometimes. Well, we called owls, or I called owls, for about 20 minutes, and nothing happened. And this is the truth. And all of a sudden, we were ready to leave and tiptoe away and say, well, that's it, not tonight. And a limb snapped overhead. And we froze in the dark and said nothing. And all of a sudden, this owl said, "Hoo!" Well, now, that's the sound the owl makes when you're invading his territory and he wants to know why you're there. Normally, the barred owl goes, "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo," like that. Sometimes only 4. "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo," or just "hoo, hoo, hoo, hoo," you see, with 4 of them. Well, he gave us the word, and so I answered him back. And of course, he wondered why I was down there, not up in the tree, but I insisted on staying on the ground, and he insisted on staying up there. So we got talking back and forth, and you know, something interesting happened. All of a sudden, from about a half a mile away, a girl owl came in. Now, this particular owl was an old one. He squeaked. Oh, 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 oh. He was kind of squeaky. And when she came in and called, she was higher pitched, you see. The girls usually have a higher pitched voice, and the owls do too. Hoo, 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 hoo. She was a little higher. So he knew it was a girl, even though it was dark. And my goodness, when she started calling, did he get excited. And this is the truth. And he said, instead of saying, "Hoo, hoo, 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 hoo," he started going, "Oh, oh, 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 oh." And he went crazy. Well, you know, it makes me think of the young fellas when they get the first girls. You know, they're interested in their first girl, and they get all excited. And sometimes certain old fellas get their last girl, or they think they do, you see, and they act the same way. They act kind of crazy. Well, you know, I kind of think maybe we shouldn't try to do anything at all about that. Well, I came over to the, well, you know, I was born in North Scituate, and after 30 or 40 years, I moved to South Scituate. You see, that's quite a while ago. And then, you know, in 1888, this being 1910, 1912, 1911, really, almost 1912, remember? I remember 1888, and I moved from South Scituate to Norwell without even packing my bags. Yeah, they changed the name. And my grandmother taught Sunday school right here in this church, and she said we sold our birthright for a mess of pottage when they changed the name to Norwell because Mr. Norwell was a bigamist. And that's the truth. That's the truth. Well, I got to love this church, and I sang in the choir for 30 years or more until my voice got so bad that they very kindly said, perhaps you could be on the refreshment committee, you know, or some other such thing. Well, I love the church organ, but you know, in homes we have reed organs instead of pipe organs. And I can't imitate a pipe organ. I couldn't possibly. But I have a way of suggesting what the reed organ sounds like, and I kind of like to do that for you now. Say, Ruth, what was that one I was going to play?
Endearing young child.
Oh, yeah. Yes, yes. Thank you, dear. And when you get to be my age, well, never mind. since we're in a church, I thought I might play one hymn and sort of bring us back into line. Well, as I said, I was born in Scituate, and after about 35 or 40 years, I got to South Scituate, and then after a long time again, I got into Norwell very easily. And, you know, at this rate, as old as I've gotten now and only come 6 miles, I'm wondering if I'm ever going to make it to heaven. It's beginning to worry me a little bit. That's assuming there is a heaven. We assume there is. Well, there's one fella that's coming up on the horizon right now who might make it quicker to get there, and that's Henry Ford. You've heard of Henry Ford. Well, you know, he's just come out with another new car. He does this every year, and he has one now that it's the new 1912, and of course, it comes out a year ahead all the time. I don't know why they do that. Magazines do that. They come out 2 or 3 months ahead sometimes. Well, I hear that Henry Ford is thinking of paying his people $5 a day. I don't know whether he ever will get to do it or not, but he's thinking about it, and they've publicized it so that people will want to work for him. Well, Deacon Thomas over at the Hanover Baptist Church, he bought one of these new 1912 Ford touring cars. It has two front seats and a big back seat with tufted leather. They're nice. And it has a top that can fold back, you see, and the top comes up and hitches onto the windshield. And you know, that Ford has front fenders that go right straight out, and then there's a sort of lip on the front. And it's pretty fancy, and there are straps that go from the roof down to the fenders. Now, I never could figure out whether the straps hold the roof down or whether they hold the fenders up. But it seems to work pretty well, and it shakes more than any horse I ever drove. But it does get there fast, and maybe you can take a Ford to heaven. Who knows? It's a new thing, and they really go. Well, Deacon Thomas had trouble starting his. You have to go down front and crank them, of course. And so he'd advance the spark lever up on the wheel. Then he'd go down around in front. And there's a choke wire, they call it. It sticks out through the radiator with a little loop on it. And he'd tweak this choke wire a couple of times. And then he'd crank, you know, and it would go. And he'd try it again. And then he'd tweak the choke wire a couple of times. It would snap back in against the radiator. And then he'd turn it over 4 or 5 times. You have to look out you don't break your wrist when you do that. And so he'd crank it, and it would go. And he'd rush up there, and he'd set the spark again so that it would keep running. Well, now the interesting thing about the Model T Ford is that when you imitate it, you make the sound of the engine with your tongue behind your teeth. Like that. And the rest of the car you make with your lips in front of your teeth. Like that. Because everything shakes, you see. And when you put the two together, you have the Ford. And he would back out. He always backed crooked. He backed over the lawn. He couldn't stay in the driveway. But he got out there all right. And he had one of those beautiful big roundabout horns with a big rubber bulb on the top. They're lovely. And he always blew it as soon as he got into the street and started off. So he sounded something like this when he backed up.